I've spent a ridiculous amount of time tearing through Limveld and smacking down the Night Lords with my fellow Nightfarers, and today I'll be showing you exactly how to navigate the night in an efficient manner to give you the best chance of taking down a Night Lord yourself. Whether this is your first time diving into the fold, or you've got a few runs under your belt, I promise you'll learn something that will make your next run more streamlined and likely to lead to victory. Welcome to another installment in the Nightreign Handbook. While on the surface this looks like another Elden Ring expansion complete with spam rolling, dozens of consumables you'll never use, and dogs with weapons attached to them, this is actually a time and resource management game, and time is very scarce. I'm going to start off this series by spending some time discussing routing strategy because it is without question the number one thing that will improve your run success rate, aside from just generally being good at soul-style combat. If you can crack this, you will easily see yourself consistently hitting above level 12, max blasts, and ideally holding your weapon of choice for boss melting by the time you fight the Night Lord at the end of each run. I've got a huge list of other time-saving tips I'll be sharing in some future videos as well, but I think learning these routing fundamentals first is going to make a way bigger difference in the long run for your gameplay. Let's start from the top and roughly work our way through a run. There's a lot to take in, so follow closely. First things first, the second you start flying in, you want to immediately open your map and take stock of three things. 1. Where are all the churches that will upgrade my flash charges? 2. Are there any camps that have affinities that match the boss's weakness? More on that later. And 3. Whether you're playing a map with a modifier like the volcano or snowy mountain, for example. This is going to heavily impact what direction you want to start pathing at the start of your run. More flasks obviously means less chance of dying aside from being one-shot, so it's always smart to make one of your first key destinations the nearest church, ideally the one closest to the outside edge of the map and close to your landing spot. Almost all of your destinations before the first ring closure should be isolated to these outermost locations, since they are obviously the most likely to be wiped out by the ring on either night. If there wasn't a church relatively close by to your landing spot, the next best thing will be to see if there's a spot with a damage type the Night Lord you're fighting for is weak to. For example, holy damage for the Tricephalus expedition against Gladius, you'd want to be looking for holy great churches or ruins. Of these two options, choose whichever is close to hit first, and just make sure that you pick up at least one flask from any church before the end of night 1 to make surviving that first night boss a little comfier. You don't need to get all of them on the first night, and people often make the mistake of trying to force all of the churches at the expense of tons of level progression while they're off running across the whole map for another flask. You're far better off slowly routing to them while leveling instead of just beelining it to the churches. If neither of these are close by, simply path towards the very first major location on your map to get enough runes to actually start progressing. Finally, that third thing I mentioned about map type is very important, and it's another big mistake I see people making. With near certainty, each environment modified map has the same final ring location, which means you can plan your day 2 route around knowing, for example, that the Ice Mountaintop map will end in the northwest corner. The Volcano map ends on the north side, and the Rot map ends on the southeast. So on the Ice Mountain map ending night 2 on the northwest, you would want to prioritize pathing along the southeast side at the start of night 2 for any flasks or affinity weapons you still need, because that should be the chunk of the map to get closed out first by the ring on that day. If you can factor these 3 things in at the very start of your run, that being blast locations, camps that match the Night Lord's affinity weakness, and night 2 ending location, then you have the most high-level part of smart routing covered, but obviously each run will be slightly different, so you're going to need to adapt accordingly. Now we can start getting a little more granular and talk about what you do when you first hit the ground right at the start of the run, leading up to hitting your first major location. When you land, there should always be a small cluster of enemies that drop enough runes for your party to hit level 2. Never, ever skip this chunk of enemies to run to a larger location first. Simply mow these grunt enemies down, sprint across all the crates, pop open all the chests, search the weapon racks and lootable bodies, and just vacuum everything up. Seriously, don't even look at anything other than to see if a stone sword key dropped from a chest that would be worth taking, or maybe some really strong perfumes depending on the starting location. Remember, we're on the clock and it's ticking down fast. You should get in the habit of only looking at loot you've picked up when you're moving towards an objective when it's early in the run. Obviously, you can spend a second or two later on double checking passes on gear as it drops later on, but otherwise don't give it too much thought. Closer to the end of the run, you're going to be getting much stronger loot, so it's not nearly as impactful as you think in the early stages. As soon as you've cleared this first camp, go to the nearest site of grace to hit level 2. There should always be one within a 5-second walk of that enemy camp, and you should also be noting where this is when you land. Hitting level 2 will give you a disproportionate amount of HP, FP, stamina, and damage, up to 40% HP from level 1 to 2 even, so never ever skip this, you'd be a fool to do so. If you're not the best Souls-like player, you can take this one step further and have your team branch out and quickly kill 1 or 2 more small clusters of enemies until you have either a total of 11,620 runes if you haven't spent any yet, or 7,922 after hitting level 2, which will be enough to hit level 3 for another meaningful boost in stats with very little additional effort. While it's preference based on which option you decide to go for, I think hitting level 3 before taking on a major encampment is usually a better choice if you're only an average Souls-like player, and it's absolutely more consistent in making the early stage of the run smoother with how much more stats you get to work with as you try to kill your first major enemy. Think about how much time you're wasting if you go down because you got greedy trying to get by with a tiny HP bar. There's almost always a talisman dropping beetle anyways right around that first site of grace, near some of those extra enemy clumps, so you'll still also be making meaningful progress in terms of fully loading out your character doing this instead of hitting a main objective first. If you're a Souls veteran and you're confident in your combat, you can definitely get away with just being level 2, but I'd suggest only doing this if you're going to clear either a grand church or a castle, as they're significantly easier than most of the main encampments and ruins, with the exception of maybe the Madness Camp Troll and the Fire Camp Flamehead Trio, which are probably the easiest of all options. Conversely, trying to clear the Blood Ruins, the Sleep Ruins, or trying to clear some of the major encampments with the Soldiers as the main mini-boss, those ones are much harder to get through when you're level 2, and there's a pretty good chance you're going to die, or it's going to take you forever to clear this so they can spawn the Site of Grace, and you're going to waste more time than if you had just farmed that level 3 before engaging. After clearing your first major point of interest, you'll have ideally hit either level 3 or 4, and will have +1 flash charges if you're able to hit a church before that one camp. Now, our options expand quite a lot in terms of where we go next, but some rules will hold true generally regardless of where you go. In general, I would suggest looking at where the next Flask Church is and whether it will be easily reachable, or if you should grab it on day 2 if it looks like you'll naturally hit it based on the suspected final ring location. If you found a weapon that you like that matches the boss weakness, you could also see if hitting a mine for a smithing stone 2 is feasible and is on the way to another church naturally. Finally, if you grabbed a stone sword key, you should probably hit the nearest Everjail if it runs along the path that gets you to that next church or mine, or another location that matches the boss damage weakness type if your team doesn't have all the gear that they need yet. You can also pit stop at any location on the way to these targets now that you have a little more fighting power. Again, keeping in mind our first rule about trying to hit the outside edges of the map first. We can always get more flasks on day 2, but we'll only have one more chance to hit the outside of the map, so prioritizing this first is key. After your first ring closure, all of the same principles apply, but in our newly established smaller borders. This is probably a good time to now generally break down the realistic level thresholds to tackle some of the harder encounters in a run as well. I'd say that all Everjails are free game after level 4, so pretty much any time right after that first main location you clear, you can add Everjails to your list. For powerful enemies, it's going to vary whether you can take them out or not at an early level, with some being not nearly as strong as others. If you want to do a quick litmus test of whether it's a fair kill or not when you pass one while pathing to another objective, just see if one powerful attack does a tiny peanut amount of damage or not, and if it's looking like it'll take a short eternity to chip away at their health, then you should probably save it for day 2. I'm not going to name every single powerful enemy, but generally you can get away with killing the medium strength powerful foes that drop those blue and sometimes purple orbs at level 5 or 6, and the ones that drop purple or legendary orbs, you probably want to be closer to level 9 or ideally 10 plus, as many of them can just one-bang you if your level isn't high enough, and your damage won't be viable either. You'll probably notice this after playing enough runs that the spawn points for these stronger enemies is typically fixed, and the same goes for the weaker ones, so it'll just kind of become muscle memory as you're walking through the map, which ones are those ones that you can engage with or not, depending on the night. Those stronger enemies that you should probably be level 10 plus for are the ones that show up marked on the map on day 2, that are going to give you a lot of trouble, whereas the weaker ones, they don't get identified on the map with these markers. So intuitively, this is how you can start identifying which spots on the map are the ones that have the weaker ones by process of elimination, with them not showing up on the map on day 2. If you do try to fight these stronger enemies without having the resources needed to take them down efficiently, you're going to waste a ton of time just to not even kill them, or you'll die and lose all of your runes, and you've just double whammy screwed yourself. So please don't take these on until you've hit those level thresholds. You're much better off just quickly clearing camps and other smaller bosses with your team. Finally, for the love of God, please stop going to the giant castle on day 1. These enemies are way too strong and tanky to be fighting on day 1, and you're actively griefing your teammates if you're trying to fight these enemies in here without being at least level 9, if not 10 plus as well. So please save this for day 2 for everyone's sake. I've played with enough randoms who die at the castle even when we're properly leveled, so going in before then is just asking for trouble. This somewhat extends to clearing things like the Rot Forest and the Snowy Mountain because it's packed with elite enemies, as I've mentioned before, and is where your day 2 final ring will also be. So even if you were able to clear all of it before the rings close, then you'd have nothing left to farm at the end of day 2, so you're leaving a ton of runes on the table by jumping the gun and going there too early. I'd suggest only ever going to these predicted final ring locations after ring 1 has closed on day 2. If you decide to run the giant castle, it's worth mentioning that there's a very strong elite boss at both the bottom under the bridge that can drop legendary items and leads to a talisman chest, and then at the top of the castle is another very powerful enemy in addition to all the other generally strong enemies strewn about the castle. If you have intentions of clearing the entire thing, you should be ready to commit a full ring duration worth of time here, as it's not going to be fast to clear. Be sure you've grabbed all the flasks you want for the run already by this point, if there's a chance that they're going to get swallowed up by the ring while you're still in the castle. There is a chance that the castle will get swallowed up by ring 1, so you kind of have to gamble on whether or not that's going to be clearable, and if not, you're better off spending ring 2's time going to the areas like the Snowy Mountain or the Rot Forest or whatever the ending area is of the map you're playing. So how long do we actually have to even clear everything we want in a given run? Specifically, you have exactly 4.5 minutes between the moment you start flying in to the start of ring 1 closing, then 3 minutes of it closing before it stops for another 3.5 minutes. Then it'll take another 3 minutes for ring 2 to fully close before that wave of enemies spawns before the boss comes in for that night. Keep in mind that killing these spawns too slowly will cause the boss to spawn on its own while they're still alive, so don't dally. This also means that each night gives you 14 minutes of exploration time, and because we're getting less time after the first ring closure, you're going to need to work with more haste than at the start of the night. However, you aren't going to have to travel as far because you're dealing with a smaller area when that final ring closes. With that said, there are a few things to keep in mind with regards to ring movements that will really help save some time or your life. If you really want to be on time for things, I would highly suggest setting up a stopwatch on your phone if you're playing from your couch on your TV, or if you're on a PC with a second monitor, throw up a timer on your second screen and keep these timings on the screen here handy. Because night 1 and 2 are the same timings, you can just reset the timer after you kill the boss from night 1. Having a good idea of how much time is left before the next ring closure is going to start will be key in gauging whether or not you can actually finish clearing the camp or powerful monster you're actively fighting without risking getting caught in the storm. It'll also let you know whether you should be pathing to another camp near the edge of the ring altogether. Another very important thing you're going to want to do in general, but especially as it's getting to within 1 minute of a ring closure, is to start quickly scouting the route you're going to have to take to avoid the ring when you know it's coming up to closing time. Is it going to be a giant wall scramble, or is it a straight shot with spirit stream jumps, or a bird tree to get you there without a hitch? I'm sure you've had those moments where all is well, and then the next thing you know, you're out of flasks in the middle of the storm, climbing a pile of tombstones on the side of a cliff, about to be the next one added to that pile of fallen heroes. Even worse is when it's after leaving an elite enemy at 10% HP, after spending 2 of your 3.5 minutes on day 2's second ring fighting it, and now you're going into the final fight under level 10 because of all the time you wasted. So make sure to take extra care on rings on day 2, especially that final ring, because you're not getting those rune backs if you got greedy and choke on the way to that night 2 boss, or you survive it but with no flask to take out likely the second hardest encounter of the run, and you'll probably die there too. If you've used your time well and you can make it to that final ring destination very safely with time to spare, I always recommend trying to clear out at least some sort of partial camp or any of the smaller fodder enemies on the way over just to get a few extra runes. I'm constantly seeing people just beeline it to the final ring, sitting there for another minute to minute and a half, just waiting for those ads to spawn before the boss does, and missing out on tons of rune potential. You can easily get anywhere from 20 to 30 or even 40,000 extra runes just killing those little shitter enemies for an extra minute or so on the way, and doing this is going to be the difference between hitting level 14 or 15. If you're really lucky and your team's coordinated, you can often head to a ruins or a grand church and just one-shot the boss if all of you drop your ults on it, with enough time to still make it to the final ring without dying. It'll give you another chance to spend your runes, and obviously give you one final upgrade to pick up before the end of the night. At this point, I think we've covered most of the critical fundamentals of effectively routing, how to optimally start off your run, what enemies to prioritize, what the viable level thresholds are for fighting certain enemies, and what the ring timings are so you aren't getting caught in the storm or leaving elite enemies on a sliver of health because you mismanaged your time. I have a ton of other small things that you can start to employ in your general gameplay that will shave seconds off of every single encounter that will add up and will continue to push up your total runes, buffs, and equipment acquired over the course of the run. But I'm going to save those for my next video where I'll be sharing many of these time-saving strategies, so consider subscribing if you found this informative and are looking for more ways to become a better Nightreign player. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.